it's a representation of other dimensional it's metaphor, right? And on top of that, it engenders feeling. Why? Who knows? That's so amazing to think about why. But it does. And because it is this sort of language of non-language and the unseen, it speaks of non-duality and it's what it is and evokes. It's like, yeah, you don't always need to. You can. I mean, it's just another beautiful layer, lyrics can be amazing, but there's so much there without it.
When it comes to self-development, no matter the method you use, the vital point is to practice. If you're ready to transform your life and claim the potential inside of you, you are in the right place. Welcome back to The Vital Point. I'm your host, Jonathan Schechter. As a breathwork facilitator and transformation coach, I'm invested in making the dynamic landscape of personal evolution accessible. My goal is to inspire you to take action for yourself. You have the capacity to evolve and bring your intentions and dreams into the world, and there's never been more access to so many incredible modalities that can help you on your journey. This podcast will help you learn simple methods you can use to transform your life and share the stories of practitioners who are doing the work so that you feel inspired to go and practice, because that's the vital point. My guest on this episode is one of my favorite musical artists, East Forest. Since 2008, East Forest has used music to guide listeners through modern journeys of deep introspection. His work really blurs the lines between ambient, neoclassical, electronic, and indie pop. He is the creator of amazing albums, too many to mention here, but including his spoken word project with Ram Dass, Headwaters, Music to Die To, Music to Be Born To, Love Bomb, and his latest offering is called Music for the Deck of the Titanic. His goal with his music has always been building bridges and creating an approach that's grounded, embodied, and unarguable. He is also the creator of the groundbreaking album Music for Mushrooms, which is a 6-hour odyssey meant to support a mushroom journey from beginning to end. I've used it fully from front to back for a couple of my own journeys, as well as grabbing different sections for other trips and for breathwork experiences. I first discovered his music as I was starting my own healing journey. And as I started to practice breathwork, I started to add music into the experiences. And East Forest music just really spoke to me, fit right in. I also really admired his process and started to learn about him as an artist. There was a podcast that I listened to really early on where he was talking about the very famous playlist used for the psilocybin work at Johns Hopkins, and how he felt like psychedelic practitioners deserved better music. And that really resonated with me. The Johns Hopkins playlist has never really been my thing either. So I was like, oh yeah, I'm into this. And as I kind of fanboy out in the episode, when I first started the podcast, I wrote a list of guests that I would really love to have on and considered a personal mark of success. And East Forest's name was definitely near the top of that list. So such a pleasure to be able to speak with him. Before we jump into the episode, I'd like to briefly share a couple things with you. First, if you are enjoying the show, then please follow the podcast on your platform of choice. There are 90 other amazing episodes as of this recording. I have a bunch more on the way that are already recorded. So join us. Leave a review so that the algorithm helps more people discover, and share with a friend that you know would enjoy conversations like this. And if you're listening to East Forest, the chances are good that you're familiar with the magical plants and other molecules that you can work with for self-discovery, creativity, and healing. And if you're familiar with these molecules or curious about working with them, or you've already had some experiences, but maybe you haven't gotten the integration that you were hoping for, then breathwork is really something that can support and enhance your own life. If you're not practicing breathwork and you're doing work with psychedelics, you're really missing out, and you really owe it to yourself to start to practice some breathing so that you get the most out of these transformative and expanded experiences. Now, my work for the last few years has been right in this pocket of using breath work to support psychedelic integration and exploring expanded states of consciousness. And I've distilled a lot of that work into the course with Tricycle Day called High on Your Own Supply. My work for the last few years has been right in this pocket of using breathwork to support psychedelic integration and exploring expanded states of consciousness. And I've distilled a lot of that work down into the course with Tricycle Day, High on Your Own Supply. At the heart of this course are three pivotal elements for using your breath to support psychedelic exploration and integration: mindfulness practice, breathwork for regulating your nervous system, and breathwork that invites psychedelic experiences just by itself. Each module has been meticulously crafted to deepen your connection with yourself, offering clarity, insight, and unparalleled emotional regulation. I included over 3 hours of recorded lessons. There are playlists. There are protocols for new breathers and for preparing for psychedelic experiences. And, it's a lot more than just learning. It's really about the experiential of combining breath work and using it for working with psychedelic experiences. At the heart of this course, there are three pivotal elements for using your breath to support psychedelic exploration and integration: mindfulness, breathwork for nervous system regulation, and breathwork that invites psychedelic experiences themselves. Each module has been crafted to deepen your connection with yourself, offering clarity, insight, and unparalleled emotional regulation. I've included over 3 hours of recorded lessons. And this course is not just about learning, it's really about experiencing a pathway to harnessing the energies within for balance, healing, and exploration of mystical experiences. The course includes 5 guided breathwork practices, as well as protocols for new breathers and protocols that you can use for preparing for psychedelic experiences. There's a link to the course on the show page, and you could also go to breath.tricycleday.com for a free preview and to learn more about the course offering. That's breath.tricycleday.com to learn more. Now, without further ado, enjoy this interview with East Forest. East Forest, it's such a pleasure and honor to have you here on the Vital Point podcast.
Thank you. Happy to chat.
Yeah, it was so fortuitous. I ran into you at the MAPS conference a few months back. The organization that I went with, they said, "Hey, you should set intentions for like what you want to get out of the conference and like who you want to meet." And I guess I thought, I don't know if I really need to do that. Like almost like a ceremony. Like it's good to have intentions, but then also to just let go of expectations and like let yourself be surprised. And
Are those
um
exclusive though? I mean,
no, yeah, right.
can't you have both?
Yeah. But I was just like, I know I just want to be open to whatever it is that happens. But
Mm,
I also wrote down your name on the list of like, okay, if I had to make a list of people I want to meet, East Forest is on there. Cause I definitely
okay.
like when I first started doing this podcast, I was like, I wrote out a list of names of like bucket list guests, and you were on there. And that was
Yeah.
really cool and also the show that you put on between, the conference days was really, really amazing.
You made it in
I
from the
did.
oh wow.
I did. It had just started
Yeah.
to hail, and what an
Yeah.
amazing experience, just hearing the hail. And
Yeah. Well, I should say that of course I was playing there, but it wasn't my event and that they asked me to play and I was excited to play, but it was supposed to be at a different venue and they lost that venue the day 2 days before. And so they scrambled to find a new venue and it wasn't really as big. And I think I was a little upset or disheartened that we couldn't fit everybody in there. And then on top of that, there was that hailstorm that
yeah,
started. So a lot of people were stuck outside and it was legitimate storm.
right.
It was, and it did not stop for a long time. I feel like at least half of the time I was playing, we were on the top floor. The hail was louder than the music.
Right.
Yeah. And I remember there was a glass, kind of old, one of those old skylight things above me. And I remember thinking, like, I wonder if that's going to hold. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really love the way that you sort of handled it. You sort of said right at the beginning, I'm not going to fight this. This is just a part of the ceremony. So it was just beautiful. Like, the music would be playing and then the rain would get louder and louder. And then all of a sudden there would be hail. And it was just the whole experience. It was beautiful.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I'm glad it was beautiful for you. Thanks for sharing your experience. That was a powerful night. Yeah.
Yeah, I was curious about like how do you prepare for those ceremony, sort of concert experiences?
Well, there's different degrees of them, or I should say, colors of them. I'd say on one side of the spectrum is um, sort of where I began with this music 15 years ago. Was leading mushroom ceremonies for very small groups of people, perhaps 20 people, and long form, 4, 5, 6 hours, and it's you're sort of very entwined and involved with the participants, and it might be everyone's staying the night, right? And I'm preparing for those. In it really starts like the moment I know it's happening, and I say, "Yep, we'll do that on that date."
Hmm.
Like a ceremony, I would say when I'm doing my own medicine work, and then it usually involves some kind of dietary changes or dieta a few weeks before, and start cutting out maybe other things, whether it's alcohol or lowering your caffeine or cutting it out, and so forth and so on. Just trying to clear up the body.
Right.
But I do my rehearsal for those is practicing improvisation, and particularly practicing the transitions, because there's inevitably probably many moments in any of these ceremonies or performances, and I kind of look at those differently. I could explain why, but where I'm thinking, oh, this isn't going well, or my mind is sort of kicking up, and or I think this is not interesting musically, or whatever it is. This is the last one of these I'm doing, and what I'm practicing before that is sort of when those thoughts come up to continue,
Hmm.
and to just keep exploring and keep flowing, keep surfing, and see where it goes, because it is surfing. It's I'm only human, and so I'm kind of getting into flow states and then falling out of flow states, and then it's such a long experience, and then hopefully getting back into flow states and so forth. And um, it's a strange thing playing music for people in that space, because on one hand it's extremely mechanical and human, like you just turning knobs and thinking like, okay, I'm going to play an F minor chord. Okay, oh, I'm going to put this whatever, this pad on top of that. Oh, this vocal line would be interesting. Ooh, this is kind of, you're following your excitement creatively like any musician would, but there's something happening if I hear from people afterwards, the kind of synchronicities that were aligning, or where they went, and how that music became a kind of architecture for an experience they had. And, I can only take credit for a part of that, sort of like showing up and rehearsing in a way, becoming
Right.
fluent. But whatever that is, I don't know what that is. I don't. It's far bigger than just me, and it's sort of like spirit speaks through everything. Me, you, everything. The trees, the wind, every experience we have, and I guess I would say the way I prepare is to try and be as fluid and open, almost like wind going through a fence. Like how much can I let spirit flow through, and not get in the way? And I could get in the way with not being very physically open or prepared, sort of like being ready to run a race. And I could also be not prepared because of my rigidity by having
Hmm.
plans,
Right.
And that's what I would think of performances, not to judge that. It's saying, well, that's where I've sort of, this is what I'm going to do. And then I prepare that and then I do it. And so that's at the one end of the spectrum. Then you guys go across that spectrum. You could go all the way to the other side, which I would say is like perhaps everything is just what you plan, and I'm going to perform that just like that, which is a great skill in itself that I don't, I admire when you can pull that off. And then there's everything in between. So the one in Denver was probably, if 0 is that nothingness state or whatever, the ultimate little tiny ceremony, and 10 is like, I don't know, you're performing something on television and it's 2 minutes and you have to. The Denver is probably like a 3 or something, or in that
Mm.
zone. I did want to improvise in that one and be open, but I remember there were so many challenges. Yeah, and this might be a very long-winded answer. I don't know. I mean,
Oh, love it.
we the venue change was a problem, so all the plans went out the window. And I remember I was like, "Hey, I'll show up at like 1 to just try to help with the sound." Like, and there were a lot of problems with the sound. So then I spent hours just trying to like fight for like, "Hey, this speaker's not working, and this one needs to be moved over there," and you're gonna. And that was exhausting just to get the sound where I thought it could be the basic level that will work for people. And I'd come from overseas the day before. I was in Europe touring. So once 4 o'clock hits or something, you think it's midnight. I wasn't
Right.
supposed to play until, I don't know, 9, 10.
Yeah.
And so I was delirious. I remember when I actually was playing, I was absolutely delirious about halfway through with fatigue. And then because the rain was happening, I knew people were stuck, and there was a lot of movement in the room, which is always difficult because I'm trying to just like zone into my thing. But anytime I'm used to, like, if something's happening like that in a ceremony, it sticks out. I'm like, are they okay? Like,
Right.
are the sitters on that? Are we cool? And like, there's so much movement going on, and the hail, and like, I could barely hear,
Yeah.
and I was worried about people.
Mm.
And on top of that, you're just like trying to like get the job done. It's like, well, I'm here to steer this ship with music, so I will do that. And that's where you just have to like pro up and be like, all right, sometimes you just have to get the job done. It's not about like, maybe this thing isn't working and this thing isn't working and that thing isn't working. It's like, fine, but what are we going to lean back on? And it's like the things what you can do in this moment. And that's where it's like, I've been doing this for a while. I'm just going to like, dig into like the skill set. Just do it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you handled it great. None of that came through as far as I'm concerned, in my experience. And you're right. And for like the audience, I know East Forest plays different festivals and stuff, but when I went to see him previously for a ceremony experience, it was just East Forest. And at this event that we're talking about, we were in the attic, and then below us was like 2 floors of basically like a rave. So definitely like different style of music, and people were coming in and going out, and like you were saying, a lot of movement in the room. Whereas I would imagine usually people are pretty stationary, like they're there for the ceremony. But yeah, I was against the wall, like behind you. There wasn't room to lay down by the time I got into the room. It felt more wakeful and kind of present in a way to be sitting up rather than laying down like I had previously at the last
Yeah.
container. So it was just very like meditative and very like just it gave it a different experience, which I found
Yeah.
very really really neat. And it was nice because I remember feeling like, oh, what do you mean there's no place to lay down? Like, just kind of bummed out. And then it was great.
Yeah. Well, that's a good example of like, it's not about me or it's beyond me. It's everyone has their own experience, and um, I I I was glad to be able to do it. I just always have, I shoot for the stars. I had a vision for, I think we all did, the organizer of that event when they asked me to do it, and we put a lot of planning into the original plan. And so you want to do that. You want to give people the best experience you can. But we did what we can. We had to meet that moment, and that's what I mean. Hey, that's what life is, right?
Right. Yeah. You gotta make some adjustments sometimes, right? Well, there were two things that came up for me during that ceremony that I would like to ask you about. The first one was as you were singing. And for those of you that aren't familiar with East Forest music, first just drop what you're doing and go listen to some of it. But um, you oftentimes will sing in like kind of this wordless voice. And in the moment in that ceremony, what I felt like was that it was like your sort of version of an Ikaro, like an ikaro isn't necessarily about the words that you're using, but the energy that you're transmitting along with the song. And in that moment, I was like, I really felt like, oh, this is like East Forest's Icaros. Like this is his transmission. And I wonder, like, what goes through, is that accurate? Like, how do you feel about your singing, like when you're not singing in the language per se?
Yeah, it's kind of there's a term glossolalia
Hmm.
that I suppose it fits that definition. And it, it just emerged probably back around 2012. I remember I have an album called Prana, and I was rehearsing for that ceremony. That was for the winter solstice of 2012, when some of us believed we would ascend into the alien ships or whatever it was. So this was a big ceremony. I'm like, oh, this is gonna be great. And I have always played around with singing in the background and looping it and sort of little layers of things, but I purposely was making the music largely instrumental because I found that it's a better way to guide mushroom journeys, and that's where the language of my music came from, and that's why it sounds the way it does. Because I was just like, how do I guide these journeys? And so I don't know. Maybe I don't. I just remember playing around with just singing, not worrying about what the words were. And some songwriters will probably find this familiar. It's like when you're writing songs and you're trying to come up with lyrics, often you start by just sort of making sounds. So you're kind of finding melody, and every now and then a word comes out. I
Hmm.
want to catch the suso out of the blah blah blah, and you're the definition sort of forming around it, and you might have a hook or something. And so I was kind of like just doing that, but just sort of enjoying the vowels, like just sort of the openness. And I started to sing more in falsetto. Um, I think early on in the project because it frankly was easier, and I just found it to be a space in my voice that I had more control, and I just found it. And then the more I would do it, the more that became easier, and my chest voice became kind of less easy for me. And yeah, so it's just got a space that I continue to dive into. And someone was talking to me about this the other day. I was on my podcast. It was with Catherine McLean, who did a lot of the early studies guiding people at Johns Hopkins with that Johns Hopkins playlist, and we were talking about it. And she was mentioning how, like, she's seen, and I've seen this too, a few people on high dose psilocybin experiences what would be defined as speaking in tongues. But another way to look at it is like making non, it doesn't, it's not English, and
Right.
it's tone.
Yeah.
And I said to her, I was like, how badass would it be? Because you're at a research center. If y'all had recorded this and you had like many recordings of whenever this had come up, and then used like experts in like linguistics and musicologists and try to see, is this an actual language? What's in there, or
Yeah.
what kind of themes are coming up musically. Like, is there always a certain interval or timing, and maybe there's a musical language, some kind of.
Hmm.
I just think that would be fascinating. Because did you ever read McKenna's La Chirera? Is that what it's called? His One of his books, where they go
Uh,
down to the
yeah.
he and his brother, I think, to La Chirera in the Amazon.
Uh
It's
huh.
a classic story of he and his brother went down there looking, I think, for ayahuasca. Was before you had to go find it, and they basically found these mushrooms everywhere. So they started taking voluminous amounts of mushrooms into their body and just tripping beyond tripping for like weeks at a time, and basically experimenting with these crazy tones that were coming out.
Hmm.
So I just think about the connection of like mushrooms and tones and how that comes out of you. Um, so for me, as most things are, it's sort of mundane how it came into me. It's just some thought you had or excitement or whatever. Or there's a reason, but hopefully, maybe there's some other intelligence coming through all art. And so now my girlfriend Rada, she jokes and calls it, like, there's light language. People who like talk to aliens, they
Right.
call it light language, and they
Yeah.
talk really fast and weird.
Uh huh.
She calls it language light, and so,
Nice.
but we spell it like LITE, so like crystal light, but it's language light. Um, so we joke about it now, and But and then I can drop little bits of English here and there. There'll be like a little hook. And I think if that's done at the right time in a journey, something very simple like a 3-word sentence, it can be quite profound. And it's just enough to kind of create a bridge back to thinking, but not so much that you have to think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned like the value of music without words, especially like for guiding the medicine space. Um,
Yeah.
I do, I'm a breathwork facilitator, and in the lineage that I practice in, you're not supposed to play any music with words that people can recognize. So you could use like some sort of like mantra or language that's not too common,
Yeah.
but not like English or like say Spanish probably would be another one that I stay away from. And I know not everybody does that, but I find it so helpful as far as like not sort of leading the witness, not like
Yeah.
pushing things in a certain direction.
What's great about music is that it's a representation of other dimensional, it's metaphor, right?
Hmm.
And on top of that, it engenders feeling. Why? Who knows? That's so amazing to think about why. But it does. And because it is this sort of language of non language and the unseen, it speaks of non duality and it's what it is and evokes. It's like, yeah, you don't always need to place then. You can. I mean, it's just another beautiful layer. Lyrics can be amazing, but
Right.
there's so much there without it.
Yeah. I guess I always thought about it as like the vibration of the sound is resonating with some sort of something inside of me, and that there's something that's kind of like vibing together. And I remember like I've always felt that way about music, but I remember like being younger going to like an art museum and like looking at like an art like a piece of art that's really famous or like you sort of universally acclaimed, and just being like, huh, I really wish I felt about this painting or this sculpture the way that I feel about art, about music. And I know that there's people that feel as much
Yeah.
emotion looking at this painting or, like a Picasso or something as I do listening to music, but it's just never been the medium with which I connect with in the same way.
There's a huge difference, and that is that music is a physical art. It's touching you. It's just sound waves vibrating, touching. It's physical.
Yeah.
And painting ain't got nothing on that. I'm sorry. I can look at one of those sculptures, but I guess unless I'm hugging it or something, it's just a visual image.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. uh, I'm curious, like, so, we were talking about the live ceremonies, and then you have albums that are, you know, sort of ceremonial albums, like the Music for Mushrooms, or I think the Headwaters project is the same, right? And they have a few different sort of ceremonial
Yeah, I've
esque.
got like a series, and some
Yeah. Yeah.
are labeled as such, and some aren't. But yes, there's like the
Yeah.
ceremony records and then the studio records.
Yeah. What do you
Mm-hmm.
say to people that are like, there are definitely people in the psychedelic space that are like live music or nothing. Like, if you're
I'd be
listening to a
like, good, yeah,
recording,
good luck finding it. You're like,
like if
pretty
you're listening to
privileged.
a recording of an Icaro, it's not the same as
Oh,
like being in the space.
right. Well, I would say it isn't the same, but I thought I had this concern too. So back when I was leading these ceremonies, and I had one studio record out that was called "The Education of the Individual Souls," my first record, and that was the record that I wrote to use myself to try and kind of get to these states that I was trying to like. What is that? What is that state I've sometimes stumbled into with mushrooms and music?
Mm.
That was realer than real, very important. But what is it, and how can I get back there? So that record was a big moment for me, an experience I had, and I gave it to a friend, and he had got very obsessed with this record, and he started setting up the circles, and so we were playing this record. That was the ceremony, and I was essentially playing around it to make it longer
Wow.
because the record's only 45 minutes, and we listened on headphones, and we had like an iPod. I had like, I was like, everyone has to listen to exactly the same time. And
Wow.
it was so crazy. We did the headphones, the whole thing, and then we're like, okay, now we're taking those off, and now I'm gonna play music. Thinking back, and I remember I did that for years until one day that friend Lewis was like, "I think it's time to jettison the album you're just gonna play." I was like, "Just play? What about the album? The whole point of this is the album." And so then it just became the improvising for the whole time, and that really opened me up more. Um, I didn't even ask. I don't remember your question. I'm just sort of like now riffing, remembering like how it all
Yeah. Yeah. Just,
began.
just sort of like that interesting sort of perspective of like, it's got to be live music in the
Oh,
ceremony
oh,
space
oh,
or
yeah.
not, or
So, oh,
nothing.
yeah. So we started recording them. We started recording them, and so I had basically like these. I was like, I guess this could be a record, right? But I
Yeah.
thought to myself, hey, who's going to be interested in long form slow music for mushrooms? There's no lyrics, blah blah blah. And I also thought too, just what you're saying, like, well, maybe it has no relevance or magic outside the people in the room. Clearly, I'm responding to them, and they're responding to me, and there's a conversation. But what about someone? Those are divorced of one another. Now they're just listening, but it was recorded years before. How would it have any meaning to their journey?
Yeah.
But look, I decided to put it out. We put out a couple little records. Some aren't out anymore, but there's one called Crystal Starship that still is. That was like, I think, my second or third record. And then I put out another one, a few more like that. Prana, Music to Die to, Music to Be Born to. And they're essentially selections from,
Right.
so it's a 45-minute album from what was 4 hours. And it did work for people. And then, and then I was like thinking about, of course, like I think about mushrooms and they work across time and it's magic. So it's like,
Yeah.
I don't know, but it's magic. I don't know, but I hear about the same kind of synchronicities happening. Like a word happens and then that's someone walks in the room and says that word in the music, and they're like, and then the rainbow came out, and like, their dead father says bows, and they are forgiven, and it's crazy things, and I'm just like, okay, whatever's going on here, obviously I can't or didn't plan that, and that's amazing. So
Yeah.
that gave me much more encouragement to continue to put that kind of music out.
I mean, I've had a experience that's similar to what you just described, listening to music for mushrooms in, by myself journeying. And even like, it's such a long album where in in the moment like things would come up like, oh, I want to hear this, and I would put it in the queue. Like I'd put the song
How
in the
dare you?
queue, right? Sorry. But like, and then, by the time the song would come on, I would have forgotten about it, because some of those Music for Mushrooms
Yeah, they're
songs
long.
are pretty long, right? But like the synchronicities that happened, even with that long album, and just randomly adding in certain songs at certain points that were just like, wow, this is really cool. And also to your point about like the magic of mushrooms sort of transcending time and space, I've always thought that way about just healing music in general. Like, yeah, it's cool if you can have somebody in the space, playing that. But I've always sort of marveled at like the someone's medicine must be really, really strong for them to transcend time and space and to be able to be healing and helping other people when they're not even in the room, or with somebody like Ram Dass, for instance, who's not even on this physical plane anymore. Like that's some powerful medicine, you know.
Yes. And I mean, it is powerful medicine. I mean, anyone who's been so humbled by it, it's beyond anything I can ever comprehend. So to me, in some ways, it makes perfect sense, I guess.
Yeah.
It's just like, sure, it works
Right.
because it's just more magic. It's amazing. Where it's grace. It's just grace.
Hmm. Yeah. The other thing I wanted to ask you about that sort of came up during the Denver ceremony, um, happened during the song Grandmother's Fear, which was already like one of my favorite songs of yours. But there was something about that night. I don't know what it was. It felt like a transmission, and it felt like you were like transmitting. And there was something about the whole, just what you're saying in the song about like with thoughtless breath, you know, instant bliss, instant infinity. like I was right there, like kind of locked in there with you.
Mm,
And so I was curious if
mm.
you'd like to share like kind of a little bit more about that song and like what that means to you and maybe how it came about.
It was I had my first ayahuasca ceremonies where I met that guy Lewis, and it's interesting. He's coming up, so I want to honor him. He pushed me into my first ceremonies that I mentioned,
Mm.
and I literally wouldn't be doing this if that didn't happen. Like he kind of just I never had organized a ceremony. They were just happening. And they were like, "We'd like you need to play on Saturday or something." And I was like, "Okay, I'll just show up. I'll do my best." And I met him at my first ceremony. It was upstate New York, and they're Peruvian shamans, and these guys were the real deal. I mean, this is before ayahuasca was cool. There wasn't a lot of it going on, and what was going on, at least from my circles, was like thick, gooey, super powerful, you know,
Right.
top level, just a rattle and some Icaros, but magic. Um, and that was just blowing me away. And it was difficult, right? But my first one I was very, very scared of, very, very scared. And I prepared a lot. And I went with this buddy of mine, and I remember thinking like, I can't go to this. I'd only heard about it in Rolling Stone magazine, ayahuasca, and it was an article profiling Daniel Pinchbeck going to a journey, the author. And in it, he had a bucket to vomit in, an eye shade to not see, and a diaper on. I was just like, what drug is this? Not interested. But anyway, I told my buddies, well, if he goes, I'll go. And I remember asking him, and I wrestled over this for months. And I remember calling him, like, what do you think? He's like, yeah, let's do it. I was like, you understand what this is? Yeah, I'm
Right.
in. Let's go.
Get your diapers.
Yeah, we didn't have diapers. I've never seen a diaper since.
Right.
Not a bad idea, but um, yes, I met Lewis there, and I gave him that record because I just finished it, and I just had CDs, and he got really into it, and so it's just like that's what it just became, was like it's always other people. It's like a community putting these things together. And so I just want to remember that Lewis kind of took me there, and we're still working together. We're working on the documentary together, which is fun. And so it's like just been like an ongoing conversation. Oh, but
Nice.
grandmother's fear. I want to
Yeah.
tell you about that. Yeah. Um, so at that ceremony, after it was done, I recorded on a voice recorder just some notes to myself to remember. And I had that recording, but it felt kind of personal. And I think there's a trope that we don't like, of people talking about their trip. It's like, yeah, that can sound pretty bad, and most people make fun of it. But it was a really important thing what I was saying on that, and it felt real or vulnerable. It was just for me. So that was 2008. In 2012, I was making this record called Love Bomb, which was technically my second studio album after that first one. I think I had some kind of pressure on myself, and when it was done or almost done, I remember listening to it and thinking it just needs like two more songs, and one of them needs to be basically something like what that Grandmother's Fear song is. And I remember I had that recording, and I had this little simple piano thing that I've been riffing on, and I was like, I'll just put those together real quick, last minute, and I threw it together really fast, and thinking like, well, it might not make it on the record, and it's very vulnerable, and so I don't know, but I can take a risk because maybe it's not even included. And I played it for my wife at the time, and to her credit, she said like, I think you should cut like half of all. There was more talking, so it just got to be less and less. And at the beginning of it, I say, "Do you want to know what enlightenment is?"
Yeah.
And then I had an answer. I explained what I learned, but there's nothing. And then
Yeah.
you just hear me breathing in and out,
Hmm.
and then I say it like, it's the breath. And because that was the answer in the journey, was that sort of singular meditative breath is when enlightenment would happen, or the infinity would explode. And I was just seeing it over and over and over again. When you'd fall out of it, it's quite difficult. It was the chaos of my mind or desires and all the stuff. And a voice had come to me at the beginning and said, do you want to know what enlightenment is? Like a playful
Wow.
And I was like sheepishly, maybe, it's like, tell me more, and it involved me purging or vomiting.
Mm.
And after that is when it all just started, it was about that kind of release and giving in and being taken over. So it's a very personal song. And I did put it out, and then it became more popular, and it taught me a good lesson about authenticity. And there's a level between vulnerability and indulgence, or sort of like saccharine versus emotional, and
Yeah.
I'm very, very cognizant of that line. And I but I like to get close to it, but I want to be on a certain side of it, because I think that's just better art. And it's sort of a less is more attitude, or metaphor is more interesting than being on the nose, and innovation with sounds. And so even with that, like, you know that was what, 11 years ago. And I don't then want to be like, all right, that's what I'll do. It's spoken word and it's journeys. And it's like, or even when I worked with Ram Dass, I'm like, it could be easy to be like, all right, who's next, do another one. And but part of me is like, what if I make a record with no field recordings? Or like my record right now, it's actually like drums, upright bass, piano, and some lyrics. And I'm like, I did that because it was hard for me. Like,
Mm.
and I was interested and excited about working and recording like a particular drummer and his drums, and how much groove I could get from the aliveness of that living thing. And then the same with the bass, and so, and the simplicity, like how much can we do with so little. And it's old school too. It's just like, so it's sort of like you're kind of trying things, and
Yeah.
where you're at in your process creatively as a career.
Mm. Yeah, there's another thing that you say in that song that I think is really applicable, as far as integration, and just a really great reminder to people, which is, um, you say, I didn't transcend my ego, we became partners. And that's, I think there's so much value in that statement, because especially within the psychedelic community, there's always this talk of like ego death, and transcending the ego, and like,
Well, the in evil, yeah,
look how many
yeah.
ego deaths I've had, and like these weird sort
Mhm.
of contradictory statements like that are like that. And to me, there's a lot of truth in being able to make friends, making friends and making partners with your ego.
Yeah, yeah. I just remember noticing how masterful my ego was at sort of grabbing me, and then being on these, basically what most of our waking life is, but you're on like a thought pattern for like probably a long time, 10 minutes, I don't
Right.
even know, and going down some twist, and then another, and on the 30th twist I'm freaking out about something, and I'm in misery in this journey, like it's the hell realms. And
Yeah.
then sort of remembering, go
Mm.
back to focusing on my in breath and my out breath. And even though the thought itself is still grabbing you, and you're like, there's a trust that if I literally am going to think about something else, the oneness of that thought would then open up perfection, because it was like my ego was not necessarily a part of it, but it wasn't that my ego was the enemy, or I should be pushing it away. I would realize how, like, it's had many, 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 many years of practice. It's very strong. It serves a purpose for me. It's important. It's a lot of my, I guess, identity in a sense. And
Right.
so it's like, we're not going to like beat something here. It's like, this is part of the journey. This is part of what we are. So it's like, bring it in. How can we work together?
Yeah.
And the idea that focusing in like this is actually supportive of the ego in a sense, because it can calm it, make it more clear and strong in a way, right? Because it's not
Yeah.
flailing around.
Right. Yeah, and there's something to being able to see that and like hold it, and not be completely hooked into it, that the medicine experience or meditation is so good at. It's like, I heard this quote recently that I really like, that's like, meditation lets you pause the story long enough to see how much of a story there actually is, you
I
know?
just think like getting off the idea of I need to transcend my ego in this lifetime was a real relief.
Hmm.
And to just be like, I'm not trying to get enlightened. I'm trying to get peace of mind. Or maybe it's actually the same thing. And
Yeah.
maybe actually I've been enlightened millions of times, and it happens that the biggest takeaway from that experience and that's in that song is that enlightenment, as we think of it, was no further away than my next breath, meaning it's
Yeah.
no further away than any of our next breath. Like it's just there.
Right.
And you don't have to earn anything or really learn anything. That is who you are. And that's what was the biggest thing. And that was more like I'm falling back into something as opposed to maybe in 30 years if I work super hard
Right.
and kick that ashram floor clean and yeah.
Yeah. Say enough mantras and
Yeah, that's all
all the things.
practice, right?
Right.
But
Yeah.
that's not like the gateway into transcendence or something.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Really appreciate it. You mentioned Ram Dass, and that's such a great record that you put out with Ram Dass.
Thank you.
Um, like besides for just the sort of the lessons that he transmits through the lyrics, the that you included on the album, what do you think that you like? How do you feel, or what did you learn from that experience, like being with him?
I hope a lot, but lots of things. I mean, to name maybe just a few, he exhibited a kind of loving awareness at times with me that was really profound to be gifted that sort of presence and then to recognize how then you could embody that for others.
Mm,
He also gave me the name Krishna, which I adopted. And so it's sort of like this ongoing mantra that's said to me that has been quite a profound change in my life. Um, and I also learned from him a recognition that he started out like anybody else. And so just sort of a testament to what dedication and love can do for a person.
mm.
So, I mean, it's awesome. And it feels pretty alive today.
Yeah. Could you speak more about that embodiment of presence and loving awareness?
Well, he would just like without knowing you, like the moment you meet, in a sense, he gave me, and I see him do this with some other people, just full presence with you. So looking in your
Mm,
eyes, your eye gazing essentially, and just
mhm.
beaming love,
Yeah.
which is essentially more unconditional because we don't know each other. So it's just like I'm just loving you. I'm just trying to seeing you as a soul. Just in wow, look at that, another soul. I'm looking at God. Wow, and, but nothing's being said. It's just sort of a warmth in presence, and that's so giving. I mean, so incredibly giving. So it shows us the power of our attention,
Yeah.
and with that is evidenced in how uh, you know, billions and billions of dollars are focused on our attention and how much we stay on our phones, on a platform, on a page to the second. That is the currency. So, you think about how that's manifested in the tech sphere in a very, very concrete way that's created a lot of power in certain areas on the planet. And then how, as a spiritual teaching, it's the same teaching about the power of your attention and presence. It's like you're just seeing how that's true, how it can actually be monetized. I mean, there's probably many other ways it could be attempted to be harnessed, but it's just something we have. So that was Ram Dass. I think that's what people were so attracted to in his later years, particularly after his stroke. He seemed to really blossom.
Mm, beautiful. Um, I'm curious, like when you're journeying, when you're doing your own work, are you what music do you like to listen to besides for playing your own music?
Nothing. I'm not. Yeah,
Mm.
I mean, I only listen to my own because I'm almost always working on something. Like right now, I'm working on a follow up to the Music for Mushrooms album, and
Oh,
these
great.
records are extremely long, and
Yeah.
so it's a very time consuming process to create them.
Uh-huh.
And so inevitably, part of that is testing it or asking
Yeah.
spirits, like, let's see how this flows and just how we feel. So there's inevitably stuff to hear that's like sort of in progress. I don't like listening to things that are released in a way much. I'm not like hard and fast about it, but I don't. Every now and then it's fun to hear something you haven't heard in a long time, and it's like you really hear it with new ears. You're like, huh.
Yeah.
But I listen a lot to the things that are like being created in a sense because you're working on it, you know.
Okay.
So it's in my life in different ways too, because I try to emulate hearing it from different angles, like how people might be using this, which of course could be very intentional in a journey. It's what it's designed for, but also cooking dinner
Mm,
or, in the morning or when I'm walking. So it's sort of meditative or other things.
mm.
I do meditation sometimes with them. So I try to like put a different brain on top of it. And,
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it's
mhm.
like it reminds me of like I used to do this like you think a song is finished and then you like bounce it down and go listen to it in the car so you can hear it from
Yeah. The
like a
car
different
test.
yeah,
Classic. Yeah. Yeah.
um and like in your process, like say if you were going to journey with mushrooms, for instance, and i- is it something where like from kind of the get-go you're also playing music, or do you wait for like maybe like the peak to kind of be over?
No, pretty much the whole time. No, for me, it's
Wow.
very ceremonial in a sense. Like, I just, it's changed for me. I mean, I'm so close to the mushrooms that I can't take them in any other way. I can't
Hmm.
ingest them because I just go straight to sort of ceremony zone. Very emotional. I just want to be with it. And so it's been indoors in that regard and with music and intention and some sort of small altar. And yeah, pretty much from start to finish, music. And but it's usually something that's what it's for. There's
Right.
that's the experience. Like the Music for Mushrooms album is an album that is designed to take you from start to finish. I think that is very valuable. Whereas with playlists, first off, someone decided, of course, how they go, but beyond the order, all those songs are usually short, and even if they're not, they were not written specifically for mushrooms. And not that that's a problem, but they're all being used for this purpose of a mushroom guidance off label. And it's just to say most people haven't experienced what it would be like to use music that's on label. Like that's what it's for. And there's one artistic voice taking you from start to finish. That's how it was done for, millennia, was one or very few people taking you through, singing you through the different songs. So yeah, that's usually like test and stuff like that.
Mm.
And my partner works in a ketamine clinic as a guide, a therapist, and so that's been a wonderful testing ground to test things.
Wow, those are some lucky patients there.
Yeah, dude, most people at ketamine clinics, they take you in, they basically give you the ketamine and just leave, and then they're like, all right, see you next time. I mean, they're just giving you a medicine.
Right.
She does actual therapy, and on top of that, she's like a master yogi playing kick-ass music. And I insisted like they have a better sound system, and
Yeah.
and I'm not even involved, beyond the fact that I just like give her music at times. They give me no discounts, no deals. They actually use my music for sessions. I don't get any compensation. I'm like, how about a ketamine session or something? But I want it helps, and it helps her, and so I want her to go in there and try stuff out, test stuff out, which is incredible to just get,
Interesting.
because they're very disparate populations than myself too, and then I get to really hopefully get a little more of an honest response about if it's working for people or not.
So, in the same way that you have the music for mushrooms, that's kind of, sort of intentionally for the mushroom journey, is there a particular album that's like designed with that ketamine journey in mind?
Yes and no. There's an album called In,
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
and then there's an album called Spores, which is a 1 hour version of Music for Mushrooms. And the only
Oh,
reason I say those versus the others is because their pacing's a little bit tighter and ketamine's shorter and tighter.
right.
But that to be said, it's true that my music is the ceremony albums come from ceremonies or improvised in ceremonies. They're infused and informed by that process
Hmm.
and that structure. I've just found, and anecdotally hearing from people, that it works extremely well also with things like ketamine, MDMA, LSD, DMT. So great. In a sense, that's like an off-label use for a different drug, but whatever works.
Yeah.
I think what it is, like when I've been in ceremony and someone else is playing music live, all that seems to matter is that music coming from the heart. It's a
Mm,
kind of openness of transmission. And I think that's the key ingredient. Like music, in a way, is helping you cultivate the frequency, dare I say, of that openness.
yeah.
So it's kind of keeping your your cells at a place where you can keep receiving, and the antenna is tuned to the right place of the numinous. And in that, it's kind of holding that and holding your attention, our very monkey attention, with things like rhythm and melody and beauty, essentially, where it's just awe. And that helps us take this journey over time and continue to hopefully be open to the experience itself.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely works. I mean, I play a lot of your music in, you know, doing breath work and different meditations. And people are always like, what was that? That was amazing. You know, like,
Oh, cool.
which is, yeah, really
It's
neat.
funny too because there might be songs that I think, oh, that was I like that. That was successful. I think that song's the jam. And I have other songs that I've released that I don't like anymore. I'm like, I really don't think I missed the mark or something, whatever it is. And yet for somebody else, that's like their song,
Right.
And I'm just like, all right, what do I know?
Yeah,
Um,
or you know, that song was playing in part of that synchronicity in their journey that like was so profound, and then it's almost like that song gets locked in to that memory.
yeah.
And that's a beautiful thing too.
Well, one advantage of recordings, I guess, is that if you listen to, like, for instance, the music for Mushrooms album for your journey, and then as a form of integration, listen to it the next day, a week later, as and at least create some time to just sit and listen
Yeah.
to see what kind of mnemonic connections there can be, and how the thread of the music can help you bridge it into your life.
Yeah. Yeah, I go back to that album. I enjoy it. I mean, there's definitely parts of it that I'm more apt to listen to just sort of driving around in my car or meditating than when I'm in the medicine space with it. But yeah, I can definitely relate to that. And kind of
Yeah.
speaking of integration, I think that's a good segue. Um, what is that? What does integration look like for you? Because I remember some hearing an interview or a podcast that you were on that like really struck a chord where you were talking about like some of the biggest experiences or the experiences that have been the so powerful for you like are you're still integrating them years later, like there's it's still something that you're working on. And I think that that's like such an important thing to mention where like, you know, some people are like going to a retreat and they have like an integration session and then they're sort of cut loose, and it's like, well, no, that integration is so much more than that. It's not quite the linear process, right?
Yeah, I mean, life isn't linear, and I'd say this definitely exemplifies that. I've definitely had there are a handful of experiences that I can think of that they're very much alive for me today. Like that first ayahuasca experience, like I can feel a lot of it right now. That moment of that feeling, and so it feels that's honestly one of the main reasons I haven't worked with ayahuasca in a long time. Is like, man, I'm still real clear on
Mm.
those journeys, and they feel very alive in me. Um, So I'll be honest, there's some fear in there, but there's also a sense of like, I don't feel that like I don't understand what to work on or what the the thing is, or not that there's one thing. But yeah, it is something that it changes over time too. I think these things come in seasons in your life, in particular ways, and they continue to flow. So things, I was in a different place and doing different kind of work on myself 15 years ago, and then the last 5 years or so, it's like there's been so much attention and time put on other people versus me that at first I didn't notice that as much, but now I'm like, wow, I need to maybe like, I know I need to find a better like balance or resolve, because there's work I have to do too. And there is a lot of work that is done when you're in service or you're playing that role, but there's the other flavor of it that's when you're on the other side of it. Um, So, I think I'm always trying to seek that and just listen. But I think the goal is sort of that life itself. There's no divorcing from it being a ceremony, or just the presence, the sense of soulful sense of life. You're forgetting about that less. And so
Mm.
that way, even the mundane things are still rich. And I just find as I get older, and I do think this is a natural process, whether or not you're taking psychedelics, it gets richer. Like things get richer over time. They might be less exciting on paper or maybe more exciting, but like either way, there's more of a depth that continues to evolve.
Yeah, hopefully you can be more present with the mundane or whatever's happening. Like,
Yeah.
profound mundane, there starts to be less separation because of your presence to it.
Yeah, it's only your perspective is sort of what maybe that's what creates it. It's sort of this or co-creates it. Um, but so I don't know if that answers your question, but it's like integration's just it's just a process that's ongoing kind of all the time. I don't wouldn't say even separate out like I have this journey and I'm trying to like turn on this new thing.
Hmm.
It's more like, well, life was already the thing. It's just trying to like tweak the thing, or you're just like molding the same clay in a slightly different way.
Yeah. I think that's a great answer, and it definitely answered the question. I think a different way maybe to ask it would be like, what is your self-care, like your daily routine look like? Like, are you doing meditation every day? Are there other sort of practices that you're doing that kind of keep you in that space of presence and clarity?
I could always improve on my routines, that's for sure. But it's changed the last couple years. Now that I'm living here in Boise, I'm in my studio here in Boise with Radha's. Her place is over here, and I should say our place. But we like to have. I like to get up early and make coffee for us for her, and then I like to have coffee with her in bed, and that's sort of like the very first thing of the day. And sometimes she's still asleep, but I still do it. I sit there by myself, and but I like to play. I like to do my music rehearsal or whatever I have to do with live music, basically first thing in the day, because that's been my way of connecting with flow or God. It's through creativity and through expressing it in some way. It doesn't even have to be that fantastical. And I found that I can get it from other things too. I get it from building things like carpentry because it's also creative, and I get it from anything really that's a little creative, like even cooking if you're kind of making it up. But the music can be pretty awesome, and typically I have to rehearse for something, and so it kind of forces me to be on this treadmill or whatever it is, jogging pretty much every day. So when I do that, the day has meaning, and every single day there's resistance to doing it. It's exactly as it's outlined in that book, The War of Art,
Yeah.
by Stephen Pressfield, and it's true. And but when you do it, this now the monkey is off my back. Now the day has meaning, and everything else is pretty much gravy. So whether I take a walk or I'm doing work or I'm mixing or I love being taking the dog out and or cooking or whatever it is. Honestly, it's only as good as if I express that sort of creative vibe earlier in the day.
Hmm. Interesting. Cool. Um, what's exciting you musically right now? Because earlier on, you mentioned kind of like the excitement of the current record that you're working on. Uh, It's called Music from the Deck of the Titanic. Is that correct?
Music for the deck of the
Ah,
Titanic. Yeah.
music for the deck.
Yeah.
Sorry. But yeah, like that you were recording it in kind of a different way with more live
Yeah.
musicians and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So that studio record was about, yeah, live drums. Jens Karas played the drums right here. And I met him. It turned out he lived 2 blocks away, and he's this great drummer. And he's got wonderful music of his own that's definitely worth checking out. But I'm kind of wondering about how to play some of that out live and whether I want to go back into having a band. I had a band before this project, and so that's sort of on my mind in the live space. And then I'm of course working on this documentary Music for Mushrooms and working on this follow-up Music for Mushrooms album. So I'm very much in a creative space of like just before we were talking, I'm kind of like curating, mixing down, and trying to master and edit songs from ceremonies. And these are very long songs, so it takes a lot of like time and attention and processing power just to like go through
Right.
one of them.
Yeah.
So I think I've got like 35, and I'll probably have another 5 or 10. And at some point, you have to just start curating it down and trying it, and then making tweaks and trying it, and then you have to hit up some mastering engineer and talk about mastering a 6, 7, 8 hour album. And they're like, "What are you talking about?" It's like, um, no, but I've worked with Taylor Dupree for mastering, and I remember he did the music for Mushrooms record, so that was 5 hours, and he pulled that off. So he's the guy. Um, but I'm excited. So I'm kind of thinking about that space a lot, like what kind of music is guiding that kind of journey, and how long it is, and what that flow is, and how I want to change that up in the future. Like I have a live setup that I've I make changes to it, but structurally it's pretty similar. I might add a piano or this or that or other people, but I'm just thinking about what it'd be like to completely shift it up. It's like, give me things I've never played in a way, and I will make
Mm.
a ceremony album from that. Like I started messing around with the harmonium on one record because it was just sitting there. I don't have much experience with it, but some really interesting things came out. And or the Headwaters album, there was a piano, my friend of mine's place. It's beautiful piano, and no one was really getting to play it. And I just had this idea, it's like, well, it could be interesting to just like get that thing tuned perfectly and do a little ceremony, kind of a hybrid. Not everyone's on medicine, but some are. And that would give like the juice of like it's a thing, but recorded at the same time and improvise. And I'm not a virtuoso piano player, far from it. Uh, but so it's quite scary for me actually to just like sit at one piano and have to hold people's attention for an
Mm.
hour, and just I have nothing. I don't know what to play, so here we go. And you're just kind of very simple ideas. But I kind of liked it. It's very simple and minimalist, Headwaters record, and it's only 4 songs. But that EP was sort of a foray into that, of like different
Yeah.
ways of thinking about ceremony for fun. And then I did one with Peter Broderick. We did a record called Burn, which is beautiful. If people are interested, that just came out, and
Yeah. It's a
the
great
vinyl just
record.
started shipping, and that's a whole story of the talk about mushrooms, and like we were microdosing, and this whole 12 songs came out in 7 days. We just had met a whole record in the order. It's on the
Wow.
record. It's the same order we recorded, and it's everything we did.
That's very
It's just
cool.
like this whole thing just came out. Um, but yeah, so he and I did a here in this studio. He came here to mix the record with me, and we're like, let's do a ceremony. Like, we'll just improvise for lots of hours and live stream it. And he hadn't done that before. He's like, it's a long time to play. I was like, no, it'll be fine, man. We'll just like take turns. If you're tired, I'll improvise for a while. And we put all these amazing microphones and all these instruments and the vibraphone and 2 pianos. And I had my friend John Dahlgren film it, live stream it. So it's like 4 cameras, and it's really intimate, some of it. That whole ceremony is up online on YouTube for free. And I highly recommend people check it out because he's an amazing violinist and he plays a lot of things. But that was the first time I'd done it with someone else.
Wow.
And it was so fun. Um, and all sorts of new ideas came in. So I'm just wanting to like push into just try new things like that because they inspire you. And usually there's some reason why it's inspiring you. Like that is spirit saying like, go this way. So you'll follow your bliss idea, Campbell.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I got that impression, as a listener. I really like the Headwaters record, and like you said, it's similar to other things, but it's different. It's more like stripped down in a
Very
way, and
minimal. Yeah.
I really love the song "Assured." That's probably
Yeah.
my favorite song off of that record.
Yeah.
Um, and
I
then
like the last one a lot. I don't know, it has a feeling to it. I think it's
yeah,
Requiem. Yeah.
nice. And then yeah, I love I play Morning Rada a lot, like as an intro song for breathwork or meditation.
Cool.
Yeah. So
Yeah, well, that's from Burr and the album with Peter.
yeah.
That's because it was the morning, and Peter had to go away the night before. This is in Ireland too, and he was coming back in the morning, and I was so like we were so compressed on our days. I think it was like 8 in the morning. I was sitting there like everything's ready to record. He walks in, and I was already recording, and he says you can hear him at the beginning of the song.
Right.
He says, "Good morning." She's like, "We missed you." He's like, "I missed you too."
Yeah.
And like this song is called "Morning Rada" because we'd make up temp titles just to remember,
Right.
not thinking, and so we're like, let's keep it Morning Rada.
Yeah. I appreciate you being so transparent about your process. And I mean, I know that I'm like doing a podcast and that there's an audience, and I'm hoping that what I'm asking is interesting to
There
them
is an
too.
audience, right? Or
There
is
is
this
an
one of these
audience, right? Yeah.
podcasts you're like, I've done those where you're like, well, I haven't released anything yet, and then
No,
it never
I,
comes out.
I mean, I don't know where we'll be when this comes out, but right now there's 82 episodes that are released. So,
Nice.
fairly,
Yeah, well,
it's not been
I
doing
I
this a
know how it
minute.
goes, man. I'm coming up on
Yeah.
300, and it's been five,
Yeah.
6 years. It's a commitment for
Yeah.
sure.
Right. What have you learned in the broadcasting process? Because it sounds like with your
Oh, a lot.
music, there's something that's like you're pushing, you're looking for what's exciting and like what's new to keep you kind of engaged.
Yeah,
So
I'm hitting
how does
that
that
wall a bit.
translate? Yeah, how does that translate in the podcast world?
Well, I'm doing the podcast, or I do retreats, or I do different things because one, it's fun, but it's sort of meeting people where they're at and opening doors that people might want to walk through. And for some, it's not the music, it's going to be conversation or a podcast. So that's was the initial impetus. But it turned out that beyond that, I actually really enjoy being in your role where I was doing a lot of listening, and I would talk to people who like essentially are my friends. And but in the podcast space, something about that mechanism, I would just learn all these things about them. I was like, I've known you for 10 years. And like, it's something about like, oh, I'm going to sit in this particular seat of listening more.
Mm,
So I liked listening. And it was a great way to meet people too. Cause I would like just meet someone somewhere that maybe that's all we like, well, we should hang or I'll get your email. And you're like, okay. And then you never do. But then I could follow up and be like, actually, you want to come on the pod? And it's a great way for me to actually get to know you. And the whole Ram Dass album came out of that, and
wow.
my collaboration with Peter, the Burn album, was because he was on my podcast. We got to know each other, you
Yeah.
know, and you kind of do a little bit. So
Right. And
yeah,
I
in
like
that
that
sense,
you.
it's been kind of cool. But yes, I need to reinvent it a bit for myself because I'm getting a little like, if I had more time, like I wasn't doing everything else, I think I'd get really into it and be like, I'm going to really produce some episodes.
Mm,
But I actually have to do it in a way where it's like I would like it to be less post production and less work.
yeah.
I don't edit them, but I do an intro and I put music in, and then of course, I'm very concerned about how it sounds. Like I mix it,
Right.
and I think that's important that the voices are at the same volume, and I EQ it and do all these things to make the voices sound more pleasing
See,
or equal.
I would love to sit over your shoulder for that because it's something that I obsess about a little bit too. And I'm like, as a more amateur musician, like God, like before we hit record, you're like, hey, your mic sounds low, and I'm like, I know, but then it's sort of like Riverside is doing that, and
Right.
so I'm like looking for someone to sort of come in and be like, this set it for this, and then forget it, and it'll be fixed.
Yeah, I've seen all sorts of crazy things. Like people have their microphone set up and it's literally facing 180 degrees the wrong way, like they're talking into the bottom of it. And I'm like, well,
Nice.
I'm pretty sure that your
Right.
microphone is upside down. And they're like, what? And I'm like, oh, I've had it like that for a year. And I'm like, okay, step one, so you do what you got to do. But it's pretty cool, like that you can, because for a while I was like, I got to do a lot more in person, and I did, and I still do when I can. But boy, does it open things up when you can
Right.
do it online.
Yeah. Well, two things I like about your podcast, like one is noticing the songs like where you pull snippets of the podcast off and use them in your music. Like I think the song with Duncan Trussell that's on your new
Yeah,
record is like that, right?
yeah,
Uh,
Yeah,
which
and
is
I
a
had
really cool song.
my last record's called Possible, and that was the first time I
Yeah.
thought of doing that. And I was like, oh, I haven't done that before. And there's a song called Bones with Bio Akamalafe and a song called Tabula Rasa with Lorraine Weiss. And they were
Yeah, that
both
was the
like
one I was thinking
podcast
of.
episodes.
Yeah.
And that was fun. And then Duncan was the first one that was more intentional, where I was like, hey, I have an idea. We'll do a podcast, but I
Nice.
will sample it. I don't know if it's a word or what.
Uh-huh.
And I think I said art delights. And he said, let's do it.
Nice. Very
And then
cool.
I did it. And I finished it. And I was like, I think this is really good. And I sent it to him. And it was like crickets, nothing. And then I'm like, all right, that's kind of his thing. He's busy. And then months pass. And I'm like, hey, just, I finished this. Here it is, just so you know. And still nothing. And this went on for a long time, like a year. And eventually I'm like, this might be a problem. Like, does he not like it? I want to put it on my record. Like, can I get I don't have there's no agent I could talk to, manager. I was like, I don't know who to talk to, but I wasn't getting a response. I started to get really concerned. Even wrote his assistant, nothing. And I'm like, this is bad. And I was like, and I even like talked to my lawyer. I'm like, what should we do? And he's like, I guess he knows. I mean, he said you can do what you want. So we just put it on the record. And like a week before the record started to roll out, the first singles, my phone's ringing and it says Duncan Trussell. And you get that feeling like, oh no, like, because I'm like, he would text if it's like, yeah, sounds good. Like
Uh-huh.
calling's like, there's a problem.
Right.
Like I've been meaning to talk to you, but I haven't. So I just want to call. So I pick up the phone, and he's like, I swear to God, the first thing he said is, I love it. He's
Nice.
like, I'm sorry, I haven't listened to it. I just can't listen to myself. And but I finally did, and it's really good. And I was like, wow, what a relief, because I think it is great. I want to share it with people. I think you sound amazing.
Yeah.
It's fun. It's a lot of words. I think it's amazing. If you really
Yeah.
stick with it.
Right.
And the video, have you seen the video?
I have. It's
It's
really cool.
insane. David
Yeah.
Lobster did that. It's this AI thing that he took him a long time. But it's one of the trippier things I've seen. Like it
Yeah.
really, everything just never stops morphing, and
Right.
it's relating to what he's saying.
Yeah. It's really neat where like the direction, I don't think we have time to really get into it, but that direction that AI is going in is pretty wild.
Yeah, I think you haven't even scratched the
Right.
surface. Yeah,
Yeah.
of where things are going to go.
Yeah. And the other thing I was going to say that I really like about the podcast is like not only is it these great conversations, but I love that you include, not only your music, but different meditations, in there as well. And that's something I try to do here. It's like we're talking about integration and transformation, and it's great to have conversations, but it's also great to have a meditation or a breath work,
Some
practice that you can
practice.
do,
Yeah,
or,
something embodied.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. I've done a bunch of meditations. I just noticed that people were really downloading those or listening to those a lot. So I thought, well, okay, I can do those if it's of service. And I
yeah.
have a Patreon where basically that's where I get to do that a lot. And we do them like on Zoom and then record them. And we have like a library of a bunch of those.
Nice. Well, that sounds like a good segue. Besides for Patreon, which people should check out, where else should they go to find East Forest?
I mean, wherever you go, I suppose, but eastforest.org is the easiest place for tickets or just really everything. If you want to be like, what's your Instagram or whatever, I want to see that movie or all that stuff is right there. It's linkable.
Cool. Well, this has been a pleasure for me. Like I said, your name was on a list that when I first started thinking about this podcast, and it's such a delight for me to have like fulfilled this little manifestation and connected with you this way.
I
And
hope I didn't
really,
disappoint.
no.
That's yeah. Well, may the universe has worked through me to give you some sort of strange gift. You're welcome.
Wow, what an amazing episode. Thank you for sticking around. I sincerely hope that you found value and inspiration in this episode. If it struck a chord with you, I'd be incredibly grateful if you could take a moment and leave a review for the show. It's a simple, cost-free way to show support and help more like-minded people discover the podcast. Also, make sure that you sign up for my newsletter at bluemagicalchemy.com or beacons.ai/bluemagicalchemy. And you'll be the first to get updates, exclusive content, and insights delivered straight to your inbox. As a way to say thank you, there is a free guide to using breathwork for integration that I'll send you for signing up for the newsletter. And to connect with East Forest's offerings, his music, his ceremony shows, and more, go to eastforest.org to learn more. That's eastforest.org. He's got a lot of music to check out. He does regular shows and ceremonies. He has the Music for Mushrooms movie coming out, amongst other things. So definitely go to eastforest.org to learn more. Remember, it's not about the method you choose or the pace at which you travel. The vital point is to consistently show up for yourself and practice. As the saying goes, it's not the destination, but the journey that truly matters. And I am honored to accompany you on yours. Please don't hesitate to reach out, connect, share your journey, the successes and challenges alike. I'm just an email, DM, or review away. Let's continue to journey, grow, and transform together. Thank you again for tuning in. Until the next episode, keep exploring, keep growing, and above all, keep practicing, because that's the vital point.